All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. We're going to welcome our next live guest right now. We've got Peter Sand, Chief Analyst over at Xeneta, joining us today. Peter, thank you for being here. Great to have you, as always. Excited to get a little bit of your perspective on what's going on kind of in the broader transportation space.
Well, thanks for having me back on Freight Rates TV. It's really a pleasure to just give a brief on the crazy container shipping market that is affecting everyone in global supply chains from east to west, and where things are mostly dramatic in these weeks and months is definitely on the Trans-Pacific, and it's carriers. Massive challenge and job at hand right now to match deployed capacity with weaker demand, because as strong as it has been for more than 2 years now on global supply chains, left, right, and center, it appears as if the economic headwinds, mainly in terms of cost of living and high inflation rates, have finally hit ground running. And by that, I mean demand has come to a halt now. We have seen retailers clear out inventories, not filling up stocks as fast as they would otherwise do at a time like this, where it would be peak season. So right now, capacity management is the name of the game. In the early weeks of October, we saw carriers blank a lot of shipments, predominantly out of Far East going into US West Coast, but also US East Coast. What we see right now is more of a normalization. The blank sailings are all but gone, but you should not see that as a sign of carriers not acting. It's just that they have not announced the sailings that they are now blanking, so they are literally still on a declining trend, also in terms of bringing capacity down. If we put a little bit of perspective onto this, we know that in the month leading up to October, carriers deployed 10% less in terms of capacity, mainly from Far East into the North American continent, but also from Far East into North Europe. And that trend for sure is something that we keep quite a close eye on, and we see rapidly falling also right now. We still see transatlantic spot rates as well as long-term rates keeping up quite well. The American buyers of the European exports are still bringing in a lot of goods. It's not going airborne to the extent that you would mostly expect also in times of massive congestion, but you literally see also a weakening tendency right now. And looking a little bit further ahead, that's what we expect also for coming months and weeks. A declining trend where carriers try to catch that falling knife without really letting go of the still strong contract market.
Yeah, so Peter, you mentioned that we're not seeing as many blank sailings anymore right now. Can you go through that real quick? You ran through that really fast. I want to stop you and ask you what that indicates actually and why we're seeing that, right? We saw the blank sailings are trying to manage their capacity, trying to keep rates elevated. That has not really been that effective, has it?
The short reply to that, of course, is just look at the freight rates, down 75%. Right. From the earlier year peak on Trans-Pacific. So absolutely not. I would say they have failed miserably, while still having spot rates significantly above pre-COVID levels. Be very much aware of that as well. And long-term contract rates elevated still some 200, 300% from pre-COVID levels. So we're still talking about extraordinary times. But addressing your question literally on the blank sailings and why are we seeing fewer blank sailings right now? Well, blank sailings is an indication of carriers announcing a lot of sailings, having their network open to demand, should demand show up. And in this case, when demand doesn't show up in due time, blank sailings is seen left, right, and center, and we have seen that in the weeks following Golden Week in China. Normally, where you tend to see a recovery of shipments being made in a say pre-COVID market, where the rush to ship in Christmas presents that would be quite late arrival. On arrival would come around, but this time around it was definitely different. So carriers literally made those ships stay in the Far Eastern region without letting them depart. And the reason for us now to see fewer blank sailings is simply because they are, of course, constantly managing those networks. And at this point of time in the year, they have also anticipated that the peak season would be all but gone. So they have literally deployed less capacity to serve the customers right here, right now, and also going into November. So you should expect like a number for blank sailings to come down in November. But that said, you need to compare, of course, the deployed capacity in the market to the level of last year. And then you see something which is down by 10-20%.
Peter, so zooming in a little bit on those rates there, obviously we can talk about the growing spread between your contract and your spot rates, but I want to focus on something that Hapag-Lloyd CEO Rolf Jensen said last week. He said that he could expect to see post-COVID, the kind of end of this recession rates being higher than even during the COVID rates. Do you think that that's something that we could be seeing a real threat of? And then how does that fall into this growing spread between your contract versus your spot?
Going into 2022, I expected rates to slide across the board, but not at the pace that we have seen in the previous 3 months. I would expect a more gradual decline as carriers had learned the tricks from the early days of the COVID. But I think right now the problem is that there is no knee-jerk reaction from all carriers across the board to cut capacity all around. That is why we have seen, you can call it, in lack of a better word, a lower level of discipline amongst the carriers. Of course, the CEOs of the major lines are going out calming the markets. They are messaging also to the global shippers that don't come knocking on our door for renegotiation of long-term rates or for spot rates even lower at the level that we see right now, because you're not getting it here. I say that, okay, shippers of the world, give it a go, because we are definitely expecting rates for a while to drop below break-even cost of carriers also sometime next year, even before that perhaps, as they overshoot on the downside before finding its new normal level.
Yeah, a bit of gamesmanship, and before we start this poker game, I'm just going to let you know I got these aces in my pocket. So call their bluff, right? So I guess my next question was going to be the sustainability of these rates being so high. The long term versus the short term is not something you expect to be sustainable for much longer, right?
I think it's spectacular what we see in terms of the spread. If I am just to refer to several spreads, if I may just highlight the long term, short term spread on Far East to West Coast of US, it's around $4,000 on the Sanela platform right now. On US East Coast, it's $2,500. It's mind-blowing in that sense, and the sheer spot rate difference between Far East to US East and West Coast, the spread that you would normally see around $1,000, give or take, is right now around $4,000. So it's still mind-blowing what is going on out there. But surely getting the short reply from me on, is it sustainable to have such a wide spread? Of course not. We do expect a narrowing gap, and we do also see long-term freight rates coming down. But we should also expect that gap not to close next week, even though we are likely to see some catch-up now with that spread opening up from being, you can say,
negative literally in a normal market where the spot rates are higher than long-term contract rates. Now that we have the opposite world, of course this spread will come down shortly, and I think you should look out for especially the Far Eastern to Northern Europe negotiations and tendering, which is going on intensively right now, as they tend to in deals like this towards the end of the year, giving an early indication on what kind of level you should expect for long-term contracts of a duration of say 1 quarter, 1 year, looking at 2023.
All right, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. So insightful as always. We will talk to you again next month. Right now, we're going to head on over to Sydney Edwards for a 10 a.m. check of our top stories.